Today's daf is Nun Aleph. We're going to start at the very top of Nun Aleph, Amud Aleph. The Mishnah had talked about a person who is traveling on the way and they get caught Friday night on the road in transit, and they're in transit and they say, let's say they are just less than 4,000 damot away from their home, and they say, listen, I want to make a landmark 2,000 damot from here. That's where my place of Shabbat is, so I can walk 2,000 damot to there, and then another 2,000 damot from there to my house. But if I get stuck here and I don't say anything, then I only have either, if I say right here is my place for Shabbat, then I have 2,000 damot to walk, and if I don't say anything, then I can't even walk at all because I'm outside of my tichum of my house, and I'm stuck out in the forest with only 4 amot to walk. So the Mishnah had said a person can say, okay, I want to make my makom shuvita, I want to make my resting place for Shabbat a tree that's in between here and my house, and then I can walk to the tree, and then I can walk the rest of the way.
If you make the tree shuvita, and when you get there, how can you go further to your home if you already made?
Because that's the center. That's the center. So you get 2,000 damot in both directions.
Earlier that you can't change.
You can't. So you made the tree your place, but then you can't go past your house. You can only go to your house.
But you actually don't stay there. You go further to your home.
Right, because you're allowed to have 2,000 damot in both directions. So you're coming, let's say, from the west. So the tree is at 2,000 damot, and then you can go another 2,000 damot from the tree to the house. Okay. So Rava says, this is the beginning of Nun Aleph Amud Aleph. Amar Rava says, "V'hu dechirahit leikaro mateh." Rava says this only works under one condition, that if you were to run to the tree, you would make it there in time before Shabbat. In other words, it's about to be Shabbat, and you say, I want the tree to be my place of rest. You don't actually have to get there. But if even running you wouldn't make it there, then you can't say that it's really your place of rest, because you wouldn't have been able to make it there. Rahit is to run. Yeah. So Amar le Abaye said to him, V'hachashchal lo kataneh. But it says that it became dark. So doesn't it became dark mean that even though it already became dark and he didn't reach the tree yet, it's still okay? Because remember, there's 2 locations of significance here. One is the tree, where he's saying that's my resting place, and the other one is the house, okay? So he said to him, no. It would seem like he needs to be able to, he doesn't need to be able to get to the tree by dark, because it says chashcha, it became dark. So he says, no. What that means is chashcha leveto, aval leikaro shel ilan matze azil. That true, he could be far enough from his house that there's no way to make it to his house in time. But there has to be enough time that if he were to run, he would make it to the tree. Then he can say that tree is, he doesn't actually have to get there, but if he could have gotten there, then he could say that tree is my place of rest for Shabbat. Ikad amrei, some say, Amar Rava says, chashchalo, ki masge kale kale, aval rahit mate. That when is it true that it became dark for him too early for him to be able to reach the tree? It means if he walked in a normal pace, but if he were to run, then he would be able to make it there. So it has to be that it's within his reach before Shabbat starts, according to Rava. Rabba Rav Yosef havu kazle ba'orcha. Once upon a time, Rabba and Rav Yosef were walking on the way. Amar le Rabba le Rav Yosef. Rabba said to Rav Yosef, Teheh shevitatenu tuted dikla desavil achu. Let our rest be under the tree that leans on or that carries its friend. In other words, that its friend or its brother leans on it. Rashi says, Ilan acher haya nismach alav. In other words, it supports another tree. So they knew there was some tree that was known in the neighborhood that, another tree had grown and was leaning on it. So he said, let that be the place of Shevita. Va'amre la, some say, tute dikla de parik mare mikarga. Let our rest be under the tree that exempts its owner from taxes, meaning that it produces so much fruit, he's able to pay the taxes from the fruit. Okay, but the point was it was a known tree. Okay? And Amar le said to him, Lo yadan. So he said to him, I don't know what tree this is. Now in the parentheses you see there that he said to him, Yadale mar, does the master know where this is? And he said, no, I don't. So Amar le simuch alai, rely on me, you can rely on me because I know where it is. Okay, Rabbah said to Rav Yosef, I know where it is, so it's no problem. The Tanya, as it says in the Braita, Rabbi Yosef, Omer Rabbi Yosef says, Hayu shenayim echad makir v'echad she'eno makir, ze she'eno makir, moser shevita tel makir. So if one person knows a location that they could set for their Shabbat place, And remember, they're traveling, so they want to be able to set a Shabbat place that's close enough to where they are that they can walk to it, but isn't so far, but isn't, is within distance from their house, so they can get to it. So the one who doesn't know the place will rely on the person who does know the place. And the one who knows the place will say, our rest will be in such and such place. Velohi, but actually it's not true. That Braita that we just said is misquoted. Because when Rabbah told it to Rav Yosef, he said, Rebbe Yosef Omer, Rebbe Yosef says. But really it doesn't say Rebbe Yosef says in the Braita. It just says, one person can hand their Shevita to the other person, and the other person can make the decision. But Tanale ke Rebbe Yosef, he says, Lo Tanale ke Rebbe Yosef, ela ki hechid likabal lamineh. The only reason why he told him that Rebbe Yosef taught that Braita was so he would accept it. Because Mishum de Rebbe Yosef nimuko imo, because we have a principle that Rebbe Yosef nimuko imo. His reasoning always makes sense. So he wanted since they were in an emergency situation that they had to pick this place to rest for Shabbat, he didn't want Rav Yosef to start having a halachic argument with him. Wait, how can you do that? How can I rely on you? So he said, Rebbe Yosef said that you're allowed to. Oh, okay, Rebbe Yosef said, then it's okay. Now really it is the halacha that you could do that, but he didn't want to get into an argument, so he claimed...
If they don't spend Shabbat together, one could do on behalf of others.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one could do on behalf of the other one. Now we're talking particularly about a case where they're together at the time when Shabbat starts them. Now, so it talked about the 2,000 amot, so it says, Hane alpaim amma hechan ketivan. Where do these 2,000 amot come from? How do you know 2,000 amot is the limit of the Tchum Shabbat? Where does it say that? So it says, Shivu, Titanya, as it says in Abraita, Shivu ishtachtav. A person has to sit in his place. Shivu ishtachtav literally means a person should sit under him. Okay? Sit under himself. Elu arba amot. These are the 4 amot. What does that mean, the 4 amot? Because if you're outside the Tchum when Shabbat starts, and you're in the middle of nowhere, and you didn't establish a place for Shabbat, you wanted to get home, but you got stranded, so then you have only 4 amot that you can walk. We learned about that. Now, that's the 4 amot, is shivu ish tachtav, under yourself. Al yetze ish mimikomo bayom ha-shvi'i means, let a person not go out of his place on Shabbat means, not tachtav, not right under him, but his place is a little bit larger, right? Mimikomo. So what does that mean? Elu alpayim ama. This means the 2,000 amot. Minalan, where do we get the idea that it's 2,000 amot? Amar Rav Chisda says, Lamadnu makom mi makom, umakom mi nisa, v'nisa mi nisa, v'nisa mi givul, ugivul mi givul, ugivul mi chutz, v'chutz mi chutz. So we have a series of limudim, a series of pesukim, that lead us to the 2,000 amot. The destination is dichtiv umadotem mi chutz la'ir et pa'at kedma alpayim ba'ama, that at the end it talks about the cities of the Levi'im, that you give Levi'im, and it says that the cities of the Levi'im had alpayim ba'ama. Around them they had 2,000 amot. But what is this whole idea here of, we learn makom from makom, nisa from nisa, this from this? So Rashi explains, what does it mean? So Rashi goes through the whole thing. We start with a pasuk, that 2 pasukim that have the word makom. The first one is this one. Al yetze ish mi mekomo. Don't let the person leave his place. Okay, but it doesn't say the word nisa there. It doesn't say the word running away. But we connect it to another pasuk, which is V'samti lecha makom asher yanus shama. Because Hashem says in Mishpatim, Ve'ele Mishpatim, it says, I will give you a makom, a place to run away, a person who kills somebody by accident. So therefore we have a connection from makom, the area that you can't leave on Shabbat, goes to the Ir Miklat, right, to the city that protects a killer. Now, Malan Ketiv Nisa Asher Yanus, Af Mikrad Al Yetze Ish Mimikomo, Merabeh Ben Nisa. So we connect those 2 things. We connect this Shabbat boundary to the Ir Miklat. And now, Danin Nisa Minisa Nisa Megivul. Klomar Danin Nisa Zo, I'm reading from Rashi. Shelo Nemar Bo Givul, Minisa Shnemar Bo Givul. So now we need to get to the word Givul. So we have the word Nisa now. We have the word running away. Where do we get the word Givul? Boundary. Dechtiv Mi Givul Ir Miklato Asher Yanus. Because when it describes not going out of the Ir Miklat, not exiting the city of refuge, okay, it says Givul Ir Miklato Asher Yanus, the border of, he can't go out of the border of the city that he ran to. So now we have the word Givul. So that means we have 3 pisukim. Now, we connect that back again to mimikomo, to our issue of the place. So now we can connect the Shabbat area that you're not allowed to go out from to the Ir Miklat again. And now we say, Vadar danim gevul mi gevul, ugvul mi chutz. So then we connect one gevul to another, and gevul to the word chutz. What does that mean? Because it says gevul ir miklato, and it says that umatza oto goel adam mi chutz legvul ir miklato. Right? It says that the goel adam will find him outside of ir miklato, outside of the gevul, outside of the boundary. So, we see the word boundary being used again. And remember, we're connecting back the Ir Miklat. We're connecting all these pasukim about the Ir Miklat to the pasuk about Shabbat. And then finally, the word Givul, we connect to the cities of the Levi'im, where it talks about the Givul being 2,000 amot. Okay? So that's where we get it from. So it says ummadotem michutz la'ir. So now we take the word gevul and the word chutz la gevul, outside of the gevul, outside of the boundary, and the word chutz appears with the cities of the Levi'im, and so we say chutz the gevul means 2,000 amot. So this is a multiple pisukim going all the way from the word makom to the word nisa to the word givul to the word chutz, and we end up connecting all of them back to create this idea that the limit that you're allowed, outside of the limit you're only allowed to go 2,000 amot. So too, outside of the city limit, right, the last house or whatever it is, you can only go 2,000 amot. So that's where we get it from. So then the Gemara says v'nilef. Why don't we learn it? V'nilaf mikira ir v'chutza elef ama. In another place, it also talks about 1,000 amot outside of the wall of the city. And of course, the Gemara talks elsewhere about what the significance of this 1,000 amot is versus the 2,000. So there were two different areas around the city of the Levi'im. Why don't we go by the 1,000? Why the 2,000? So danin chutz mi chutz, v'in danin chutz mi chutza. Okay, because there it says chutza. It doesn't say chutz. The word is slightly different. So we want to go with the one that says alpayim, 2,000, because that's where it says chutz. And we're connecting to the word chutz, not to the word chutza. So then the Gemara says, Umay nafkamina, what's the difference? Hatanat v'Rabbi Ishmael v'shava kohen uvav kohen. Zoe shiva, zoe bia. We learn elsewhere that it says the kohen will come and the kohen will return. And we say that even though the two words are different, one uses the word shav, return, and one uses the word ba, to come. We equate the two, and any halakha that applies to the first one applies to the second one. So too here, what's the difference between chutz and chutza? It's the same thing. So why can't we learn to chutza and say it's only 1,000 amot? So the answer is hanei mileh echad leka midid damele, aval echad leka midid damele midamele yalfinan. So the answer is that when you have only one example, we would be fine. Okay, chutz and chutz is the same. But when you have two options, one is identical, chutz and chutz, and the word chutz is 2,000 amot, and the other one is not identical, it's chutza. So what do we do? If we just had chutza, we would be fine. But since you have an option that's identical, you have chutz and chutz, we go with chutz and chutz. Why should we go with chutz and chutza when we don't need chutza? We could do chutz. So we're good. We go with 2,000 amot. That's where it's learned from. So it's learned from the cities of Levi'im, basically, but to connect the city of Chutz La'ir, to connect that pasuk about what's outside the city of the Levi'im, all the way back to Mikomo, B'yom HaShivi'i, all the way back to the word Makom on Shabbat, took a lot of steps. We had to go through the Ir Miklat, the city of refuge, and connect that to the city of the Levi'im. We had to connect our Shabbat place to our cities of refuge, and our cities of refuge to our Levitical cities, and then we have it. So alpaim amat agulot. So according to, we had a machloket in the Mishnah. How do we determine these 2,000 amot? You established your Shabbat residence under a tree or wherever. How do we determine it? Do we put you at the center and take a compass or whatever and draw a circle around you of 2,000 amot? In other words, where the distance of the line of the circle is 2,000 amot from where you are at every point. Okay? Or do we make a square? We make a line out, in other words, 2,000 amot straight in every direction, and we make a square around you with you in the center. So obviously, if you make a square, it's going to be bigger. If you make a circle, you could fit the circle inside a square. So you're going to have you're not going to have the corners of the square, right? You're going to lose the corners of the square. So Rabbi Chanina ben Antogonos man nafshach. So we have a problem because Rabbi Hanina ben Antigonos, who says that it's a circle, so if he's agreeing with us and he's learning from the cities of Levi'im, didn't the cities of Levi'im have a square shape? They had a square shape. And they had corners. And if he doesn't learn from the cities of Levi'im, so then where did he get the 2,000 amot from? You can't have it both ways. He did learn from the cities of Levi'im, but it's different. Amar Korah, ze yihye lahem migrashei ha'arim. So he said, I agree, we learn it from the Levi'im. The only thing it says, ze yihye lahem migrashei ha'arim. This is going to be the outskirts of the city. Ze, only here, only in the case of a Levi'im do you get a square. In the case of Shabbat, it's a circle. Okay, so that's why you get only a circle. Tane v'Rabbanan. And what do the rabbis say? What do the rabbis do with that pasuk of the zeh? Tane Rav Chananya Omer. Rav Chananya says, "Kazeh yehu kol shovatei Shabbat." They interpret it instead of a limiter, instead of a limitation. They interpret it as broadening. Kazeh yihye everything. Let everything be like this. Right. Not just the cities of Levi'im, but all boundaries should be like this, square. Amar B'Chabar Yaakov, Rav Yaakov says, "Hama'avir daled damot b'reshut harabim eno chayav ad shema'avir hen ve'alachsonan." So the halacha is that a person who carries 4 amot on Shabbat, obviously in a reshut harabim. This is not talking about traveling now. Traveling is different. Traveling is tichum. Here we're talking about actually carrying an object in the public domain for 4 amot. He says, you're only chayav, you're only liable if you carry it, not 4 amot exactly, but hen valachsonan, the diagonal of a square that is 4 amot square. In other words, if you would envision a 4 amah square, 4 by 4 amah, a square, so the diagonal of that is the amount of space that you're not allowed to carry something. Okay, so it's going to be more than a simple 4 amot. It's going to be the diagonal that goes across the square of 4 amot. Okay, that's the amount that you actually can't carry because we envision it as a square. Okay, he's using the same concept. We envision there as being like a square. Wherever you are, wherever the object is, we view it as on a square. So we view it as traveling on the diagonal of a square when you move the object, and therefore you get more than actually just 4 amot. Right. Mm-hmm. It's going to be 5 and change. Right, it's going to be 5 and change, the diagonal. Does he give you the exact figure here? Yeah. So he says it's going to be 4 amot and 8/5 of an amah. So it's going to be 5 and 1, 5 and 3/5. 5 and 3/5 of an amah. So it's going to be significantly more than 4 amot. Okay, 1 and 3/5 more than 4 amot. Now, okay, Rav Papa says, Badek lan Rava. Rava tested us with the following question. Amud b'reshut rabim gavoa yud v'rochav daled tzarchen v'alachsonan. Although we asked, the question was asked, if you have an amud in the reshut rabim, you have a pillar. Now we know that if a pillar has 10 tefachim in height and it's 4 by 4 in its width, right? We know that it's 4 by 4 in its dimensions, right? So it's got a length and width of 4 by 4 and it's got a height of 10. So then we say what? That's a Reshut HaYachid, actually. It's considered a Reshut HaYachid in its own right. So what do we do with the... does it have to be square also? That was the question. Or could you have a circle of 4? Does it have to be square or could it be circular? So the answer. So he says to him, they answered, Va'amreina le, we say to him, La v'aynud Rav Chananya, Detani Rav Chananya Omer, Kazeyu kol shovetei Shabbat. Didn't we already learn from Rav Chananya that Ze yiyeh lachem means all measurements of Shabbat, we turn them into a square. It has to be square. So if we talk about a 4 by 4, we don't mean that it's a circle where the center, from the center point is 4. We mean an actual square of 4 by 4 could be drawn. Could be created. So unless it's square 4 by 4, that's not going to be considered an actual Reshut HaYachid in that case. So the 4 by 4 would have to be a square 4 by 4.
So reverse of what we said earlier.
Right. Well, everything we're saying is square, not circular. There was one opinion that said circular, but we rejected that opinion, and we say everything with Hilchot Shabbat is square. So that's why even if we measure 4 amot, we're not going to measure 4 amot. We're going to measure a square. We're going to measure the diagonal in a square of 4 amot. And here, when we talk about something being 4 tefachim, we don't mean that it's 4 tefachim circular. From the center is 4 tefachim. We mean that it's a square of 4 tefachim, and that it will have also a diagonal of 5 3/5 tefachim. Now, this is it goes back to the machloket we had in the Mishnah between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. There's a fundamental machloket here about eruv. What is the main way of making an eruv, and which way of making an eruv is inferior, which is superior, which is inferior? So in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda said, we read in the Mishnah that somebody who's traveling on the way and can say, "Oh, I want my place for Shabbat to be under a tree somewhere." So we said that Rabbi Meir said only a poor person is allowed to do that. Meaning, and you're also considered poor if you're walking and you don't have anything. You're in the middle of nowhere. You don't have any bread. So you're allowed to do that. But at home, you're not allowed to do that. At home, when you have your stuff, you have to make an eruv with food. Rabbi Yehuda said, no, on the contrary. The main way of making an eruv is with your feet, is by going to the place. By going to the place and standing there. Okay? But if you don't go, but putting bread was a leniency that they gave you that you could put bread, because you could send somebody else to do that. But really going there and standing there and saying, this is going to be my makom shavita, under this tree or wherever you are, in the middle of wherever, that is the main way of doing it. Even if you don't have bread. Doesn't matter. So Rav Nachman said, Amar Rav Nachman machloket b'mekomi. The Rabbi Meir savar ikar eruv bapat, anihu de'akilu rabanan ilaveh. Aval ashir lo, ve'Rabbi Yehuda savar ikar eruv beregel, ani ve'echad ashir. So Rav Nachman says this whole machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir is talking about where you want to make your makom shavita where you are right now. In other words, it's Friday afternoon. You're standing at a certain coordinate. You're standing under a tree, and you say, "I want this to be my makom shavita. I don't have any bread with me right now, but I know I'm 2,000 amot from home, and I want to get there. So if I don't say anything, I'm not going to have the space to be able to get there. So I'm going to say, this is my makom shavita right here. Otherwise, I'll be restricted to 4 amot, right? So I want to be able to have that leeway to be able to get home. So I'm saying it's right here. Rabbi Yehuda says, you're allowed to do that, no problem. And even Rabbi Meir says you're allowed to do that. However, he says, the difference is that Rabbi Meir says that if you were in a normal situation, you wouldn't be able to do that. You would have to use bread. It's only because it's extenuating circumstances. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, no. Anytime you want, you can make an eruv by going to the place. Going to the place is the best way to do it, according to Rabbi Yehuda. However, aval b'makom ploni divrei akol ani'in ashir lo. So what does it mean? That if you're talking about a distant place, in other words, when you're in the place, mamash, you're in the place right now, that's where Rabbi Yehuda says, if you're in the place, that's gold. That's the gold standard of eruv. And Rabbi Meir says, you really shouldn't do that. But we'll let you get away with it. But in another place, in other words, if you say, I want my makom, I'm 4,000 damot away from home, I want my makom shavita not to be where I am now, but to be at the tree 2,000 damot from here. There, Rabbi Yehuda says, everybody agrees, you can only do that in an emergency. Okay, to physically be in the place and say, this is my makom shavita, that's where you have a machloket. Rabbi Yehuda says, that's ideal. Rabbi Meir says, we'll let you go. But saying in another place, I want my makom shavita to be over there at the lamppost, and I'm not actually there, there everybody agrees that's b'diavad.
Time-wise declaration has to be Friday afternoon,
Before Shabbat starts. Okay? So, V'zohi sh'amru man katani la Rabbi Meir. So in the Mishnah, when it says, this thing that the rabbi said that you can be me'arev, and this was the statement in the Mishnah on Memtet Amud Bet, I believe it is, on Memtet Amud Bet, that Rabbi Meir says, that the Mishnah said this, that we said, that an ani can use his feet to make an eruv. Rabbi Meir said that's only an ani, but not a rich person. And Rabbi Yehuda said, no, even a rich person. So that's talking about there. V'ahaya ka'ea eno makir o she'eno baki b'halacha v'lo amru me'arvin bapat ela lahakel man katanela Rabbi Yehuda. In other words, you have to read the Mishnah like this, that what is the situation at the end of the Mishnah when it talks about this is what the rabbi said, that an ani can make an eruv with his feet. It's talking about the situation where the person is actually in the place. Okay? Is actually in the place. So that's why he says, Ve'ahaya, what is he talking, what case is he talking about? The person who doesn't know a place remote from him to make the eruv, so he makes it in the place that he is right now. That's where Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda had a machloket, where Rabbi Yehuda said, even in the ideal case, you can make the eruv right here. Okay? And a rich person is allowed to use bread, but it's not ideal. But everybody would agree that if he were designating a place far away, that it's not ideal. It's not ideal. So, and however, Rav Chizda says, no, I disagree. Rav Chizda amar machloket b'makom ploni. The Rabbi Meir savar ani in ashir lo, Rabbi Yehuda savar echad ani ve'echad ashir. Aval bimkomi divrei hakol echad ani ve'echad ashir. The ikar eruv baregel. So what do you have? The exact opposite. That according to Rav Chizda, no. Everybody agrees that when you're in the place and you say, I want this to be my makom shevita, even without bread, that is 100% lechatchila. That is 100% ideal. Everybody agrees. When does a machloket develop? When you say, over that tree, over there, that way, 1,000 amot from here, that's where I want my eruv to be. There, Rabbi Meir says, that's only for a poor person. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, anybody can do that. Anybody can designate from a distance. So there's a big argument here, because according to the first version, when you're in the place that you're making the eruv, that's where Rabbi Yehuda says it's perfectly fine and Rabbi Meir says it's no good. And everybody agrees, or that it's only in extenuating circumstances. And everybody agrees that if you do it from a distance, it's only extenuating circumstances. Rav Chizda says, no, even from a distance, it's perfectly fine, according to Rabbi Yehuda, for anybody to designate. Rabbi Meir says only a poor person can designate. But when you're in the place, even Rabbi Meir will say it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly good. So Rav Chizda is more optimistic, right? He says that when you're in the place, even Rabbi Meir thinks it's 100% good. Now, how do we learn the Mishnah then? So, Zohi she'amru man katanela Rabbi Meir. So when it says in the Mishnah, this is the case where the rabbi said you can make an eruv with your feet. Who was the one teaching it? It's Rabbi Meir. Va'ahaya ka'e. And which one is it applying to? Aha, mi sheba b'derech b'chashecha. It's talking not about when is Rabbi Meir disagreeing? Not in the case where you're in the place that you're making the eruv, but where you are caught on the road and you say, I want my eruv to be in a tree a mile from here. Or whatever, not a mile, but 1,000 amot from here. That's when Rabbi Meir was arguing. And when it says that the rabbis only introduced the idea of eruv with bread to be lenient, even Rabbi Meir agrees that that's true. Because according to Rav Chizda, even Rabbi Meir would agree that if you could get yourself to the place that you're making the eruv, that's even better than leaving bread. Okay, according to Rav Chizda's version. Tanya kivadeh Rav Nachman. However, the Braita follows the opinion of Rav Nachman. It says that whether you're poor or you're rich, you can make an eruv with bread. But a rich person should not go outside the tchum. V'yomar, and say shevitati bimkomi, and say my place of resting is where I am now. So he says a rich person, meaning a person who has means, he has bread available, he has what he needs. It doesn't mean rich like you have to be rich. It means that you have what you need to put an eruv. That person should not go to the place where he wants to make an eruv and say, this is my place for Shabbat. Why shouldn't he do that? Because he could have put bread down. Right? So what do you see? That Rabbi Meir is saying, even when you physically go to the place, it's still better to put bread. That's what Rav Nachman said. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Echad ani ve'echad Hashem arvin baregel, v'yetzei asher chutz l'tchum v'yomar teishivit ete b'makomi, v'zo ikaro shel eruv. that Rabbi Yehuda says, no, when you go to the place, it's ideal to go to the place without bread. Who needs bread when you go to the place? That's the chatchila. והתירו חכמים לבעל הבית לשלח עירובו ביד עבדו, ביד בנו, ביד שלוחו, בשביל להקל עליו. And the rabbis allowed the Baal Habayit, the busy home manager, to send a servant or to send a child to place the, a son or a child, whatever, to place the Eruv in the right location for him. But really, if he could get himself there, it's even better. So what do you see? Even when you're in the place, Rabbi Meir is going to say, nope, that's only b'diavad, that's only when you don't have bread. Not like Rav Chisda said, because Rav Chisda said that if you're in the place, even Rabbi Meir agrees it's great. So no, he doesn't agree that it's great. He wants you to have bread anytime possible. He does not think that sitting there is ideal. Rabbi Yehuda said, Maaseh ba'anshe bet memel u'v'anshe bet gurion ba'aroma. That the people of Bet Memel and the house and the Anshe Bet Gurion in Aroma used to hand out dried fruit, basically, to the poor people in the Shnei Batzoret, in the times of a famine. And people from the village of Sichin and the village of Hanania would come, and they would sit at in other words, they were 4,000 damot away from the place where the free dried fruit was being given out, and they were starving, they were hungry. So, they made a Eruvei Techumin, but they didn't have bread to make an Eruvei Techumin, they were really poor. So what did they do? They went and sat at the mark at 2,000 damot, waited for nightfall, and then maybe they went back home and slept, and then now they had an extra 2,000 damot past that mark to go to the place where they were giving the free fruit. Okay, so what do you see from that? That they used staying in the place as an eruv. Now, that doesn't really necessarily prove his point, because Rabbi Meir will say, yeah, well, they didn't have anything, they were poor, so that's not a chidush. Amar Rav Ashi says, we can also learn an inference from our Mishnah, because it says in the Mishnah, that if a person went and he decided, you know what, I'm going to go to the next town, and it's within eruv distance. In other words, it's 4,000 amot. It's 4,000 amot from where I am. I'm going to start walking right now. So then, that the point is that he never set up an eruv, but he almost went on Friday. He started to head out on Friday, but he never made it. And his friend turned him back. So it says, the guy who actually started to leave, and they prevailed upon him and said, no, the weather is bad, whatever, go back. He can go the next morning, because it's as if he made an eruv, because he really wanted to go. He intended to go. But they can't go. And why can't they go? Because they didn't make an eruv. Okay, but the point is, Rashi says, in other words, he had set out to go there, so it's as if he set an eruv at the midpoint. If he's 4,000 amot away from this other place, it's as if he set an eruv in the midpoint, because he actually physically started to go. And there's some location, there's some spot in the middle where they would normally make the eruv, and he intended to go there. And they stopped him. But he went with the intent to go. So, we asked the question. So why is it that he's allowed to go and they're not allowed to go? And Rav Huna said, the point is that he has two houses. This guy has a house in this city and a house in the next city. So when he left with the intent of leaving his house behind. He was like a traveler on the way. And a traveler on the way is allowed to not put down bread, right? Even according to Rabbi Meir, a traveler on the way is like a poor person. So he's allowed to not, he wasn't going to bring any bread with him. He was really traveling to the next city, thinking he was going to spend Shabbat in the next city. So he didn't bring anything with him at all. So at that moment, he was like a traveler on the way. And therefore, his intent to make his eruv at that point is valid. And so he establishes his eruv through his walking, even though he didn't put bread down. You might say, what do you mean? Why didn't he put bread down? He has bread in the house. The answer is because he was leaving that house. He was heading to the other house. And he got stopped. But these people who plan to stay in city number 1, they don't have an excuse. That can't count as their eruv that they wanted to go. They have bread. They should be able to put the bread down. So therefore, Al makol makol b'makom ploni ani'in ashir lo. What do you see from that? That to designate a place from a distance, in other words, if everyone had gone to the place and sat there on Erev Shabbat, fine. But you're talking about a place that he never actually reached. He never got there. He just thought, oh, I want to make my Eruv that place because I want to go from there to my other house. Since he started walking on Erev Shabbat and he was thinking he was going to go all the way there, and maybe he would stop at that spot on the way, but that was going to be just his Eruv, he really was going to make it all the way there. So that walking made him a traveler. But everybody else who didn't walk wasn't a traveler, and therefore they can't make a distant point their makom shavita. Because if you're making a distant point your makom shavita, you have to put bread down, unless you're a traveler. And only he was a traveler, because he was planning on leaving his house in city A and going to city B. Everyone else wasn't planning on doing that. So you see from that, Shema Mina, that we follow the first version of Rav Nachman, that if you're in the place, then according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's ideal. And according to Rabbi Meir, that's at least passable if you're in trouble. But if you're not in the place, only a poor person, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is allowed to designate a place that he's not in without bread. Again, we have a situation where the most unfortunate Hebrew tutor of all time, Rav Chia bar Ashe, is teaching Chia bar Rav, the son of Rav, in front of Rav. And of course he always gets corrected by Rav. So what happened? He told him, Echad ani ve'echad ashir, that according to Rabbi Yehuda, whether you're poor or whether you're rich, you can set up an eruv without putting down bread. Amar le Rav, sayem ba nami halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda. Rav told him, remember to conclude by saying the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda. So he told him to add that. Rabba bar Rav Hanan havaragil da'atei ma'ar tivna lepumbedita. Rabba bar Rav Hanan was accustomed to going from Artivna to Pumbedita. And that was, so what he would do was, what Rashi explains is he would sit in his house on Erev Shabbat, ve'omer, and he would say, Shevitati betzinta. My Shabbat rest is in Tzinta, which is a specific place in between the two cities. So it's 2,000 amot from his house, and it's 2,000 amot from his destination, so it gives him space that he can travel. So Amar Tei Shevitati Betzinta. That's what it says in the top. We're on Nun Bet Amud Aleph, the top. Amar Le Abaya. Abai said, Mai Datech. What is your reasoning here? Rabbi Meir Rabbi Yehuda halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda. We know that if there's a machloket between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda, as we learned last week in the daf. However, Va'amar Rav Chisda, and Rav Chisda says machloket b'makom ploni, that Rav Chisda says that, okay, so we follow Rabbi Yehuda, and according to Rav Chisda, Rabbi Yehuda would allow you to designate a place, even a place you didn't go to, without bread. Right? That's what Rav Chisda said. We said that wasn't the case, but that was what Rav Chisda said. But however, V'harav Nachman V'tanya Kivate. But what about the fact that Rav Nachman says no? Rav Nachman says if you're in your house, according to Rabbi Yehuda, then if you want to make a makom shavita, you got to get yourself there. If you want to do it without bread, you have to go there. You can't do it from the comfort of your own home. Okay, so that, if you're going to be there, it's one thing. But if you're going to just do it from your home, only a poor person is allowed to designate a distant place as their makom shavita without bread. According to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rav Nachman. And that's the one that we follow, Rav Nachman, not Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, yeah, you can designate the tree all the way over there, even from the comfort of your home. But according to Rav Nachman, that's not true. According to Rav Nachman, either you're a traveler and you're allowed to do that, or you got to actually get there. So he said to him, Amar le Hadribi, I retract my position then. I made a mistake. You're right. I was following Rav Chisda's interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda. That was wrong. Amar Rabbi Bar Chama. Rabbi Bar Chama says, Haray Amru. They said, Shavat yeshlo dalid amot. Hanotenet eruvo yeshlo dalid amot olo. He said, if you sit in a certain place outside the Tichum, you get 4 amot in every direction, right? You get 4 amot. Now, what about if you put an eruv there? Do you also get 4 amot? In other words, so Rashi explains, Shekone shevita beraglav yesh lo dalid amot. Right? We know that if you sit in your place of dalid amot, you're outside the Tuchum, you go to a place where you want to make your Eruvei Tuchumin, and you sit there, so you actually get 2004 amot. You get the 4 amot in front of you, plus the 2000. Because even if you didn't make an Eruvei Tuchumin, you would have the 4 amot anyway. So we don't subtract it. We give you 2004. So if from where you are to your house is 2004 amot, you're still good. Right, it's an extra freebie. We add in, sometimes you get an extra deal. For 2,000 we're throwing another 4. So the question is, what if you put an eruv of food there? Do you also get 2004, or is it only if you sit there? Because we understand if you sit there, you already have 4 amot because you're sitting there automatically. Even without any eruv, you would get 4. So we add on another 2,000. But when you put food there, why should we give you the extra 4? Why do you need the extra 4? That's the question. So he said to him, Amar Rava says, Tashema, listen. Lo amru ma'arevin bapat ela lahakel aleh asher shelo yitzeh v'yarev beraglav. We said that why did they allow you to use bread to make an eruv in order for the rich person that he doesn't have to actually go and sit there? He can send a servant to go put the bread down. Isn't that nice? That's the life. So, however, if you're going to tell me if you're going to tell me he doesn't get 4 amot, he only gets 2,000, and you're going to subtract the 4, you're not going to give him the extra 4 if he puts bread down. That if he were to sit there, he would get 2,004, but if he puts bread down, he gets only 2,000. Then how can you say that? How can you say you're being lenient on the rich person? You're stealing 4 amot away from him. That's not lenient. That's stringent. He answered him, no, afilu achi. That's not true. Because even though he gets less, in other words, you can't prove it. You can't prove that he's going to have that extra 4 amot. Why? Because even if we subtract the 4 amot, he's still benefiting. What's the benefit? Not in terms of the number of amot, but in terms of the fact that he doesn't have to schlep out there before Shabbat and sit there. So since he doesn't have to schlep out there and sit there, it's worth it to subtract 4 amot maybe. So it's still a kula, it's still a leniency because he doesn't have to get himself physically to the place. Even though he may actually get 4 amot less of walking distance as a result of putting bread there instead of sitting there physically. And Bezrat Hashem will start the Mishnah tomorrow.